Welcome to RNS virtual events. Um, I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to uh, trickle in here and make sure we get everyone on board before we start. There is a chat room or a chat column that you can access by clicking on the bottom row of your screen. That uh, area will be monitored for questions that the audience has, and at the end, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So please do put in any questions you have for our panelists. And also, while we're waiting, um, if you want to identify yourself, members of the audience, and just tell us where you're from, uh, we'd love to say hello, say hi. And we'll get started in a few minutes. Hi, Jeff. We have Sharon Nell from St. Edward's University, who's mentioned in a couple of the pieces that we've been writing this week. Wow, wonderful. So many people from Catholic institutions. Great. We'll just give it another minute here as people continue to file in, and we'll get started. There's a whole group gathered from Clark University in Dubuque, so
Huh? Isn't that nice?
yeah. So a lot of ringers in the audience. It'll be an interesting
Mhm.
question and answer period.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Wonderful. Thank you all for coming and for listening to what I hope will be a great conversation. Okay. Welcome again to RNS virtual events. I'm Paul O'Donnell. I am the editor-in-chief of Religion News Service. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our final virtual event of the year. We do have one event already scheduled for the new year. In January, we'll be talking with uh, Ryan Burge, a religion sociologist, about his new book called The Vanishing Church: How Polarization is Reshaping American Faith. That will be January 20th at noon Eastern. So 12 p.m. Eastern on January 20th is our next event after this one. And the link to register for that event will be posted in the chat as well. So uh, with that, I will get us started here. Uh, I just also should note that this event is being recorded, and we'll be sharing this with the transcript with all the resident people who registered probably tomorrow, maybe Monday. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Patricia McGuire is president of Trinity Washington College in Washington, D.C. It's the first liberal arts institution for women. It was chartered by Congress in 1897. President McGuire, who has been in office since 1989, has received the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities Distinguished Service Award in 2018, I wanted to note. Robert K. Vischer is the 16th president of St. Thomas University in St. Paul, Minnesota. He took that role in 2022 after serving as St. Thomas's Law School's dean for the previous decade before that. Amy Uelmen is Director for Mission and Ministry at Georgetown Law School and a Senior Research Fellow at Georgetown's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and has written a lot about Catholic identity and religion in the public square. Heidi Schlumpf is the former executive editor of the National Catholic Reporter and currently a senior correspondent for Commonwealth Magazine. Religion News Service was fortunate enough to catch Heidi in between those two gigs to um, convince her to write a couple of the articles in our series on the same topic that we're going to discuss today, um, which are all on our website, and you can find them at religionnews.com. Thank you so much, all of you, for your participation. Um, Rob, I'm going to start with you because in a lot of ways, this series and today's panel did start with a conversation that we had earlier this year in in which you sort of floated this question in what sense is your school, St. Thomas or any school, any Catholic university or college, a Catholic today? And I'll let you explain that. I mean, but I guess what I'd ask you is your university was founded nearly 150 years ago by a Catholic archbishop. It's named for Thomas Aquinas, continues in the Catholic intellectual tradition. In what makes you ask the question, how is St. Thomas a Catholic school?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for convening this conversation. It's an important one, and I think grappling with the question, what makes us Catholic, is a healthy question to be consistently grappling with. And it presents itself a little bit differently today than in previous eras. I think in previous eras, there were many Catholic colleges and universities that were able to define their Catholic identity demographically. This is the college where Catholic students went, where Catholic faculty taught. Um, and that's changed at many or most Catholic universities. So at St. Thomas, we have about 10,000 students, and fewer than half of them report or self-identify as Catholic. Um, and we have faculty representing all sorts of faith traditions. So what makes us Catholic? Now you can approach it formally like, well, where's the juridical relationship with the church? And we're a diocesan university. But more than that, how should the Catholic identity of the school be experienced as relevant by students coming on campus? And the way I frame at least the beginning of a response is at St. Thomas, we have to be committed to equipping and empowering every one of our students for lifelong flourishing. Now that's an aspiration that's not contingent on whether a student happens to be Catholic or happens to be coming from any particular faith tradition, but it means we can't lose sight that we have to have a higher, broader, deeper aspiration than simply preparing students for careers. We do that, we're very good at it, but we have to lift our gaze, to borrow a phrase from Pope Leo in his recent missive on this. And so it can look different and have different permutations of this in different disciplines at different times. But for St. Thomas now, it means we put questions of meaning and purpose front and center, and we do it through a Catholic lens institutionally. It doesn't mean that every constituent has to connect with it through a Catholic lens, but that's our DNA, and we try to make it as accessible as possible. And what we find is for this generation of students, many of whom report not having a sense of meaning or purpose, recent studies indicating that they're the loneliest age cohort in America today. Where they connect is around concepts like vocation, the ministry of accompaniment, the culture of encounter. That resonates deeply with them. And so, to step back again, what makes us Catholic? I think the answer will shift over time, but it always has to be rooted in the capacity to evolve to meet the needs of students today and prepare them for life in a more fulsome sense than simply do we have the skill set needed for an entry-level job upon graduation.
And how, when you talk about these sort of core values that you relate to Catholicism or to Catholic thought, how are these imbued, or and are you talking about separate classes, or are you talking about in every class, whether it's a nursing class or a business class or what have you, that these things get kind of uh, communicated, and how do you talk to your faculty about doing that?
Yeah, it's complicated, as you know, because a university is not a command and control organization. So it's a thousand flowers blooming and a million different pots, and some bloom faster than others. I would give you a couple examples. So we have a first year experience class that every undergrad student takes, and trying to push into that more of this substance about formation and increasingly the virtues. We've also just introduced an initiative where we will, in 1 year cycles, introduce all four cardinal virtues to all of our undergrad students, both through the first year experience and through other programs and materials. That's an example where you don't have to be Catholic for the cardinal virtues to enrich your development as a person, but it's an unmistakably Catholic lens that we're bringing to the conversation.
Can you just say what the four cardinal virtues are?
Oh, you're not supposed to ask the follow-up cross-examination questions. Uh,
There's,
uh, it's fortitude, prudence, temperance. What's the fourth? Amy Uelmen. Can I phone a friend?
You can
the
you
charity
can't.
truth.
Yeah,
No, it's not true.
justice. We're being told
Yes,
justice.
justice. Thank you. Fortitude,
All right.
justice,
Sorry to put you on the
temperance, and
spot.
prudence.
Yeah.
And this is the year of justice. And I'm a lawyer. That's the worst part.
So, Pat McGuire, your school is somewhat unique, as even within the Catholic realm. Um, it's designated as both a predominantly Black institution and a Hispanic serving institution. Um, can you explain a little bit about how that came to be, and how serving um, minority students or minority populations in Washington uh, is part of your mission, and perhaps how is that Catholic?
Well, Paul, and listening to Rob's answer, it occurred to me, being Catholic is not about what we teach, it's about what we do. And here at Trinity, that's very true in terms of creating the ethic of care and the ethic of justice on campus. We live by the social justice teachings of the church all of the time. But our story really goes back to why we were founded. We were founded because women were excluded from then Catholic University in 1897. And the Sisters of Notre Dame, who founded us, said that women as well as men deserve the right to illuminate their minds and souls with learning. And that founding vision, that knowledge is part of the divine plan for human nature, comes through in Ex Cordia Ecclesiae, 100 years later. It comes through in everything we do, that the very act of education is an act that is not only temporal, it's spiritual as well. And what happened over the years with Trinity continues to be a women's institution. Also, we're a bit of a unicorn, predominantly Black, Hispanic serving, women, Catholic identities that are rarely found together. And what happened was in the 70s and 80s, when the great men's schools went co-ed, Catholic, Georgetown, all of them, we began to see a decline in our population of historically white Catholic women at Trinity. This happened at all the women's colleges, not just Trinity. And we had to figure out, was there a future for this institution? And it was the sisters who said to us, why are we trying so hard to reclaim the past when there are tens of thousands of women at our doorstep who don't have access to higher education? And those women don't look like us, but they need us as much as the historic populations need us. And that was when Trinity turned its attention to the District of Columbia, nearby Prince George's County and began to welcome students from our local schools in great number. And over time, our population changed from 95% white Catholic to today we're 56% African American, 30% Hispanic. We have a large undocked population, but it's all through the lens of action for social justice, which is the mission we get from the Sisters of Notre Dame. So we define our Catholicism in the charism of the founding congregation. And we teach about that all over the place. Everything we do occurs with the lens of social justice. So that's our spiritual place in the Catholic tradition.
Right. That's fascinating. Um, Amy, you think and write and talk a fair amount about questions of diversity in education and Catholic education. I mean, as Pat is alluded to, it's the mission of Catholic colleges has always, it was founded. A lot of schools were founded to serve Catholics who at the time were immigrants and generally lower on the economic scale. And there is this sense that immigrants are still should be the population, or first generation Americans, second generations should be the focus of Catholic education. Um, but there's something perhaps that, as Pat was saying, inherent in the mission of Catholic schools that has to do with serving a wide range of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I love about what Rob and Pat have said so far is this notion of Catholic education is we are at the service of people who are walking through time, through history. And so looking around, the students, faculty, and staff that make up our communities are struggling with all kinds of different questions. And so I think one real beauty of the Catholic Church and Catholic higher ed in the US is just the tremendous variety of approaches. And so the different spiritual currents and spiritualities that inform what exactly would be the emphasis. And so it's really like a beautiful mosaic, and it doesn't have to all be the same approach. There are different emphases. And so I think in some ways, one of the passions that I have, and I think one of the gifts that we can give our students in Catholic education is to help them connect the dots. So for example, sometimes you hear, oh, graduate study, law school is too late to open the conversation about what are their moral values. And first of all, I think that's not true, just as a matter of fact, but also they don't yet have a clear idea of what it means to be a good person as a lawyer. And so this sense of how do you connect the dots in what will be your professional commitments? How do you bring together the complex questions of how you bring together your values and the work that you will be doing? And then I think the other horizon that's open before us is the state of the world. I mean, the questions are really challenging. The world is on fire in so many ways. And so the Catholic Church also offers, I think, just an alternative worldview, a counter to a lot of the excessive individualism that seems to drive other ways of approaching education sometimes. A very worked out Catholic social thought set of principles and structures and ways of thinking about how do these values inform the work that we do, that then offer just an alternative way of approaching the whole endeavor really across the board of Catholic higher ed.
Huh. I mean, there's a huge practical aspect of this, right? Is that the because of demographic changes, because of just the state that a lot of smaller colleges and universities are in, financially, and that part of the question about what makes a Catholic school Catholic, comes from, uh, I guess, like adaptations that schools have had to make given financial realities. And Heidi, you wrote about this focusing on St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. Um, and you talk about how some alumni and faculty have been disappointed as the school made cuts in, especially in its theology and philosophy department, um, which many considered to be core to its Catholic identity. Um, St. Norbert is not alone. There's been a lot of colleges that have been pulling back on sort of these things that we have always associated with Catholic schools. Can you talk about the way that St. Norbert is sort of representative of what's going on in general across the country?
Yes, Paul, thank you again for having me on this panel as well. The St. Norbert story, yeah, it was very controversial because it wasn't just trimming, but actually cutting all of the theology faculty and leaving just part-time adjunct faculty teaching out the core required theology classes, but not having a theology major or minor anymore. And, a number of current former students, alumni, and certainly other Catholic commentators were asking the question, like, does this affect the Catholic identity of the school? And some people say yes, and the Norbertines who run St. Norbert, uh, say that you can still have a Catholic identity. They're obviously still teaching theology classes, but just, very few students are majoring in theology and or philosophy these days. I think I agree with Amy that there's a lot of diversity about what Catholic identity is. The other story that I was able to do for this series was about kind of the other side of the spectrum of traditionalist schools that really lean into maybe that older version of Catholic identity that Rob was talking about, where all the faculty are Catholic. And the newer school that was in the lead of that story, this Catholic Polytechnic School, where the founder talked about, rosary carrying, daily mass going, adoration attending students as being typical of who that school would attract. Um, I do think it's worth pointing out that this question of Catholic identity is something that the entire church is grappling with, and certainly the church in the US and worldwide. So it hits higher education in a particular way, but it's something that there's quite a bit of diversity and controversy about across the church as well.
Yeah. And the certainly the question of Catholic identity on Catholic campuses is not new. I mean, it's been going on, and changing for as long as there's been Catholic institutions. Um, and I'll just sort of do some rough history, which anyone can please jump in and correct me on. But the sort of landmark in my lifetime, our lifetimes is in 1967 when um, a bunch of Catholic educators got together and put out what is called the Land O'Lakes Statement. Um, and it really was a recognition of the presence of non-Catholics, of how Catholic institutions had evolved and weren't just priests and sisters teaching Catholic kids. And it welcomed non-Catholics and said, and I'll quote, it says even that they may be even necessary to bring authentic universality to the Catholic University and would help make the Catholic University a Catholic-sponsored pluralistic society. Um, does that resonate with you guys? I mean, is that how you see today, 30 or sorry, 40, maybe 50 years later? Do you see yourselves as participating in a pluralistic country, but just with a Catholic approach? Um, I want to get back to this question of mission is like how much of it at your schools or in your ideals is are you spreading the faith? How much are you um, trying to educate Catholic kids, or are you just a Catholic avenue in a sort of pluralistic world. And Rob, I'm going to throw that one at you.
Yeah, it's a great question. The way I see it is the diversity of our campus, the socioeconomic diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, national origin diversity, and religious diversity as well is a great gift. I don't think that makes us less Catholic. I think we're living out the mission in ways that connect with populations that were not coming to Catholic colleges a century ago. Um, so we have a very vital campus ministry program, and sometimes that includes bringing students into communion with the church. This fall, we have more students in our OCIA program than we have since 1970. So there's some real vitality to that. But also, it's very vibrant with our Muslim students, with our Jewish students, with different Protestant evangelical students. I think that there is still good to be done when a Catholic university supports a student's strengthening of their faith, even if that faith journey does not culminate in reception in the church. And I know that's controversial in some circles, but that's how I view it. There's still value there. Certainly, do we want to invite people into deeper questions that might lead them into communion with the Catholic Church? Of course. That's a wonderful thing. That's such a great blessing. But there's more than that. There's more value than that. And we have this generation of students who are craving depth. They're craving purpose. They want to go past the superficial questions and really understand who they are and what they were created for, what their calling is. And it's not as simplistic as how are we going to get these non-Catholic students to become Catholic once they come to St. Thomas?
Yeah.
And I think really baked into all of this are the horizons of the Second Vatican Council. And so at the heart of our work are all of the areas of dialogue that were articulated so beautifully in the council. So ecumenical, interreligious, the engagement with all of the different areas of culture. And so the notion that to be Catholic is also to learn how to be open to the world around us, to see, look out of the windows, and rather than being closed into a monolithic kind of space. And that said, I think it's also wonderful to acknowledge that a lot of students are struggling in finding their core sense of identity. And so I was laughing when Heidi was saying rosary carrying, daily mass going, because I am too. And so also the sense of how do we model for our students the depth of a faith commitment that is lived out with practices of piety, but also with a way of learning how to communicate so that your own experience of faith and your own faith story can be accessible and understandable to people who might be coming from a different background. And so I think that actually also makes you a better lawyer, by the way. So also in terms of professional training and engagement as well. And so those are when all of those elements are brought into what we think about an educational experience, it can become very, very rich because it both strengthens their identity and strengthens their capacity to communicate. And not just for students, but also for staff and faculty as well.
Yeah.
You know, Paul, I'm going to jump in here to say we're at a crisis moment right now in our world and in this nation about what are the core moral values that we should be living by, you know? And as Catholics, we take the first principle of social justice, which is the dignity of human life and the care for human life. And we have right now models in our secular government of people who claim to be Catholic who think it's okay to kill people, fly planes over them and drop bombs on their boats and so forth. I know that sounds like a political statement, and it is, but the fact of the matter is that there is so much confusion in the secular space about what our faith is and also about what any faith is at this point. And the secular space is using religion in one form or another, whether you're Catholic or Jewish or Muslim, to pit people against each other and to claim a kind of hegemony over other human beings that is oppressive and that disrespects human life. So I come back to our job is not to, as Catholic universities, is not to convert people to religion, to a specific religion. It is to teach them how to live lives of, of core moral values that protect and respect human life, that protect and build communities, that help everyone find fulfillment, not in power games over someone else, but in the way in which we help to build thriving, happy, peaceful communities. That's our job. That is inherently Catholic. And I'm not really going to take a census of whether a student decided to be Baptist or African Methodist or Muslim. I'm going to take a census on, do my students respect human life, and are they able to live those principles every day in every way and make political choices? Actually, we should be teaching them to make political choices that are rooted in our moral values. And I don't see that right now. It's a very confusing world that our students are interfacing with. And the role models, so-called, are pretty terrible right now. And our job has to be to counter some of that.
I would just, can I agree 100%
Please.
with, as I often do, but just to say too, and I'm sure you agree with this as well, that our faith has a lot to contribute to that conversation. And one of my other hats is that I do actually teach a theology class as a part-time adjunct faculty member at Loyola University here in Chicago, where I teach Catholic social teaching and current events. And the students there are very hungry to learn about what our tradition can teach about many of these issues, issues of war and peace, issues of justice, immigration, economic justice. And there's such a wealth of the tradition. And that's part of, I think, the church's job too, is to educate people about that, as well as journalists' job to do that as well.
Yeah. Since we've brought up the federal government, I thought I'd I'd uh, ask a couple of questions. It again, like historically, it was the sort of those early to mid 70s when Catholic schools really were able to take state funds. I mean, federal and state funds. After the Supreme Court made some decisions, mostly about money to build buildings, but it's um, and at the time, or shortly after, I think Catholic schools were wary. There was some wariness among Catholics of, how involved to get, how much to start depending on the federal government. Um, and, some commentators say that it was then when Catholic colleges began to sort of minimize their religiosity just to be able to fit into these, to not to make sure that the federal funding kept coming. Um, Nowadays, the current administration is clearly leveraging those ties um, in an attempt to quash or to reform diversity efforts on campus. Amy, you've written a good deal about this, especially recently. Can you tell us sort of what the state of play is on this kind of on these relationships and what the federal government is asking for and what you think about it?
So I think it's well known that we had a challenge in March when a federal prosecutor inquired, have you eliminated all DEI from your school, in a letter to Georgetown Law School? And with a threat that if not, no applicant for our fellows program or summer internship or employment in our office who's a student affiliated with your school will be considered in a school that continues to teach and utilize DEI. And so I think it's also pretty well known that our dean, who just stepped down from that role in June, Dean Bill Traynor, responded with a pretty strong pushback, which was, as a Catholic and Jesuit institution, Georgetown University was founded on the principle that serious and sustained discourse among people of different faiths, cultures, and beliefs promotes intellectual ethical and spiritual understanding. And so this notion that the cultivating a space of diversity and inclusion and belonging and all of the programs that go with it is baked into what it means to be a Jesuit university. And so I think one of the core problems here is with the very term DEI. And purposefully, I believe, being very vague about what that means, not really precisely defining it, in a way that tries to encompass just anything that's going on. And what's getting swept into the debate is programs that are actually very ordinary. And so one of our incoming president, Eduardo Peñalver, in conversation with him, has helped Bill and I in conversations about two senses of DEI. So one is this very ordinary language sense. Diversity means what it means in the dictionary. And so for that reason, the scholarship that we've been doing, we've been able to toggle across the Catholic intellectual tradition and to say this is really plain vanilla stuff, work of fostering a sense of inclusion and belonging and community and the kind of the stuff that makes good conversations in classroom and a good learning environment. There's a second sense of DEI that refers to commitments rooted in really contested academic theories. But that's not the only thing that's going on in our schools. And so I think the confusion is being generated when those two meanings are just collapsed and the confusion about the latter is weaponized to try to sweep in all of these really kind of very ordinary programs. And so the risk for me is that what happens with that dynamic is that we end up with a narrative that is extremely individualistic. And so it's a pull yourself up by your bootstraps sense of the American ideal and the American experience that certainly does not encounter the complexity of American culture. And it's not up to the federal government to dictate to Catholic universities what their narrative should be. It is up to us to be able to articulate the nature of those values. And so I think the risks are very great that we end up with a very flattened narrative, not only of what the federal government is trying to enforce, but of the culture itself. And so for that reason, it's really important to push back.
Yeah.
Paul, if I could just, I agree with everything that Amy says, and her piece is terrific, and she actually came and spoke at Trinity about it, so we were happy with that. But I'm going to go out on the limb a little farther here. People know that I do this from time to time, and just say, look, the administration's attack on an effort to abolish DEI is really about its fundamental racism and its lack of respect for and desire to repress opportunity for Black and Brown students. And it's completely tied to the anti-immigration actions as well. My students are terrified right now. I have students who don't want to go home for Christmas because they're afraid to travel. What kind of country is it that does that to young Latina women or young African or Caribbean women? Seriously, this is a scandal. It's a moral scandal. The claim that DEI or anything related to it is illegal is just bunk. There's a lot of lawyers on this call. The Supreme Court did not realize that DEI is illegal. It ruled that affirmative action in admissions is, and the ruling was very clear about that. The administration has taken that and weaponized that ruling, but fundamentally, the administration's war against DEI is terribly racist, nativist, and it is immoral. And we should be calling it out. Every Catholic institution should be calling it out rather than saying, oh, we're going to change the name of the office. Well, that's fine, but what are you doing to combat this terrible moral crisis in America?
Yeah. Rob, can I ask, and lawyerly responses are welcome, but have you experienced any heat from the White House or from Department of Education?
Sure. Very early on in the administration, we were one of the first schools. We had a $6.8 million grant canceled for our School of Education that was dedicated to scholarship funds for special ed teacher candidates. And the only explanation was that it was a DEI initiative. And I assume someone had done a word search on our grant application. And of course, we had to explain as a condition of getting the grant how this would contribute to a teaching profession that reflected the diversity of the communities they served. But um, that was enough to cancel it. So yes, we've been affected. We've had some other grants canceled along the way, and I'm always happy to have conversations about what our work does or doesn't do, but there was not a lot of interest in conversations on that. I will say more broadly, apart from the legal and the political dimension of it, there's a challenge, at least, especially for a school like St. Thomas, where we have key constituents who are on the left side of the political spectrum and the right side of the political spectrum, everywhere in between, of building understanding and support for the work we do because it has become so associated with the political cleavage in our country. And so it's hard to do that at scale. I do it as much as I can through face-to-face conversations and stories and explanations. And I'll just throw one out here. One of the most controversial terms now is equity. Are you working for equity? And so the story I'll tell is that we have various etiquette dinners, both at professional schools and undergrad, we invite all students if they want to participate in the etiquette dinner, where they have someone leading them through what fork to use, et cetera. And the reason we did it is because we didn't want any of our students, particularly first-gen students who hadn't grown up with a lot of experience at more formal business type dinners, not to be penalized because they didn't know how to function in that environment. And every person I've ever explained those etiquette dinners to has said, that is a great idea. You should totally do that. Can I support these dinners? I said, okay. Now, you don't have to call that equity, but that's a pretty tailor-made illustration of equity. I say this just as an example. The noise and the tumult, it really requires every institution to be explaining the work that we're doing. And so I think terms do matter, but I'll always say, call it whatever you want. Put the terminology to the side for a second. Let's talk about the work. And that almost always sheds more light than heat. The challenge is doing that at scale and pushing back against the waves of misinformation and caricature that we're dealing with.
Huh. Fascinating. We'll get to questions in just a minute, but I still have plenty. Um, uh, one, so Catholic colleges are not the only ones that are experiencing financial difficulties, and clearly not the only ones experiencing heat from the federal government. Um, Part of this, and again, I go back to, part of this is a question about affordability of college, about who's going to college. One thing that one trend that we've seen nationally with all kinds of colleges is that women are outnumbering men, that the degrees being awarded are going more to women than to men. Um, in the data that we sort of pulled together for this series, we found that actually that wasn't true of Catholic colleges, that women are not attending Catholic colleges, or rather, there's been a decline in the number of women. So it's sort of reversing the trend nationally. It's something I wanted to ask you about. I mean, obviously, Pat, you have a different perspective on this because of your undergraduates being all women, but um, is there any insight you could offer into like what, why women are maybe not considering Catholic universities and colleges, and whether there's anything to be done about that?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I haven't seen the data, so I would be interested to know more. And is it affecting the whole sector or certain kinds of institutions? I do think that we are in a moment in the church where women's roles are are confused and confusing. Just today or yesterday, the Vatican decided that women can't be deacons. I think every time something happens in the church that sends a negative message to women, that means more women are likely to probably seek out a great secular university, because why go to a Catholic school if I'm not going to be treated as a whole person? Although the women's colleges do. So don't look askance at the women's colleges. I think, the other thing that may be driving it is this entire problem of affordability. And unfortunately, some Catholic institutions are extraordinarily expensive. And, if you look at the demographics, which I have studied because we're the only predominantly Black institution among the Catholic institutions, Xavier being the only HBCU, we have the lowest or one of the lowest net prices of any. But I look at the other institutions and their prices are very high, and they're very expensive and don't necessarily have lower net prices. So I think we have to look at pricing. We have to look at campus cultures also. Some campus cultures can be still, after all these years, quite hostile to women. I think it's a point for Catholic institutions to examine their own consciences and say, are we a place where women can thrive? And that's, I think, a call to every institution to ask that question. Same for Black students, Hispanic students, students who are different from the main.
Yeah.
And again, Paul, the data more generally shows that women, especially younger women who would be prospective college students, are more progressive. And because of the way Catholicism is presented in the popular culture, and because of some of the decisions of some church leadership, and because of the way many Catholics voted in the last presidential election, there is this association of the Catholic Church with a more conservative, reputation. And so I could see why that might affect some women's decisions about colleges as well. Again, I haven't seen the data either, but I find that very interesting and would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So one member of our audience actually asked a question that follows on this, and I think we've covered it in different ways, but I mean, I think the essential question is, how would you as Catholic educators answer a person who says like, if it, why should I go to a Catholic college? If Catholic colleges are not necessarily teaching Catholic doctrine, if Catholic colleges are, beset by the same problems as every other college, why should I go to a Catholic college? Why would I proactively choose a Catholic school? Does anyone want to jump on that, or shall I just point to somebody?
Sure, I'll say you can't just use the word Catholic as a generic label.
Mhm.
No student should choose any college just based on a generic label. That would be like saying, well, I want to go to a Division I school without knowing anything about it, or a women's college without knowing anything about it. I think Catholic can be part of the matrix of choice, but students need to understand that within that matrix, there's an incredible amount of diversity. There's 230 Catholic institutions, and we're all very different. I would say to a student looking at Trinity, if you are Baptist or Muslim, come to Trinity because we welcome and celebrate faith, and you can be expressive in your faith. We find this with our students who are not Catholic because they've been in public school. They're surprised they can express their faith while in school. They sing in the gospel choir. They love having prayer and worship. This is not something that they shy away from. And because we're Catholic, we welcome them. And I think more important than a label is what is the quality of the student life experience on the campus? And will the student feel that she or he can live in community in a way that's healthy and life-giving on that campus? That's what they should be looking for. And that's what Catholic schools should be giving.
Yeah.
And I would just add, I agree with Pat. If you've gotten to know one Catholic college, you've gotten to know one Catholic college. I don't think it's a simple binary about are you learning Catholic doctrine or are you being shaped in other ways. So at St. Thomas, I mean, every undergrad student has to take theology and philosophy. We have the oldest and largest Center for Catholic Studies in the country, and there you can do a deep dive into church intellectual tradition as well as Catholic social teaching. There's lots of opportunities, but it's broader than that. But what will be the thread throughout every student's experiences is putting onto the table a set of questions that you're not going to find at every college or university. So our biggest enrollment overlaps here at St. Thomas are University of Minnesota, University of Wisconsin, and Iowa State. The distinctives there are clear. They're great universities that are very good at doing what they set out to do, but there are things they don't set out to do that we do. And I think that's a compelling choice for some students and their families.
Yeah. There was another question in the chat about faith formation, and Rob, you just answered it for St. Thomas. Pat, how much required what we would call any sort of faith formation is there at your school?
We do require our undergraduates to take courses in philosophy and religious studies. We don't have theology. We call it religious studies because our student body is so interfaith and ecumenical that they are more attracted to that. I will say that our students of many faiths love scripture courses, and they frequently challenge the Catholic faculty on their own understanding of scripture. So that's very popular. Philosophy, the same way. I'll also point out that in many of our other disciplines, the social justice beliefs and teachings thread through economics, politics, all of the other disciplines. In our healthcare, the same way. We don't see the Catholic teaching as being segregated in just religious studies or just campus ministry. It's something that must flow through most of the teaching and most of the activities of the campus in ways that the faculty figure out and decide the best way to do that. But it's kind of an ethic of the campus. And that's our students find it very fulfilling and very appealing. And the faculty seem to enjoy it as well.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, Heidi's piece, I'll quote from Heidi's piece, is that when we talk about uh, the the loss of theology departments or classes in theology, I mean, the statistic that Heidi cites is that the number of Catholic higher education institutions with theology or religious studies departments dropped from 69% in 2016 to 63% in 2023. So it's still you could still find it if you want it. It's not like it's vanished. And I think sometimes we in the media like talk about a trend as if it was absolute. But um, yes, Heidi.
Oh, can I just add something? So the
Yeah,
sort of why choose a Catholic school, I would just add as someone who has, committed her professional career to covering the church, but also as a parent of a high school junior and senior currently going through that process where we're looking at schools for our children. Um, to me, it's not that faith and values can't be experienced at a public or other private institution, but I know that many, again, there's diversity, but many Catholic schools do that so well. And what parent wouldn't want that for their child to know that the faith and values that were important in the first 18 years that you spent trying to share that with your child, to not have that carry on in those years when they're figuring out who they are and what their identity is. So again, that can happen with a good Newman Center at a public school. There are other private schools that have a lot of great liberal arts classes as well, but it happens at so many of the Catholic schools like the three that are represented here today.
yeah,
And just the fact that the word formation is on the table. And so what Rob was saying earlier about these are the questions that we're putting on the table. And so there's lots of ways of working through them, but to know that highlighting those questions is an absolute priority. I think that does a lot of work in a world that is also so confusing.
yeah. Um, so we've got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to ask, I mean, if I don't think we're really in danger of federal funds completely drying up, but the question that some have is that if Catholic schools come to rely less on federal funds, or just even because they don't think it's reliable, um, and are looking for funding, perhaps from wealthy donors, a situation that even I think more a decade ago, Scott Appleby, a professor at Notre Dame. I think he's emeritus now, but in studying this problem, talked about the tigers of federal funding versus the dragons of donors who present a paradox of sectarian, world-renouncing Catholicism. And this is somewhat what Heidi was talking about in terms of these very conservative Catholic colleges that have been founded in the past few decades. Um, but it leads me to ask you all, how is this all going to resolve in the near term? I mean, what are the forces that you have to acknowledge or obey in shaping the mission of your college or how you think of your school as a Catholic school? Is it the donors? Are they going to be the most powerful thing? Is it the students? Is it the faculty? I mean, is it you? Are you going to be the final word? How does this all play out?
Well, I'll just offer, I mean, all of those constituents matter greatly. The notion that we'll return to a simpler time when we are not wrapped up with government funding at all, I think is completely naive. Like if we're going to say no to Pell Grants, if we're going to say no to state grants, if we're going to say no to federal financial aid, to federal loans, I mean, we operate in a competitive marketplace where students expect certain levels of services and experiences that are just not possible if we cut ourselves off from the landscape of higher ed as it has evolved, for better or for worse. We're also dependent on benefactors too. Like the fundraising is a very important of the mission and how we live that out. Student choice in their selection of colleges. The overwhelming majority of colleges are tuition dependent. All of that matters. If I view myself as the leader of the steward of the story, what I can do, and it's not going to make everything easy, but it's going to make sure we're faithful to mission, is make sure I'm telling the story in clear, compelling, consistent terms so folks understand the importance of the work. That could be an elected official. It could be an 18-year-old student and their family. It could be a wealthy benefactor. If they are diametrically opposed to the work we're doing, we're going to have trouble. But more often than not, what their misgivings are rooted in is a caricature of what the work is. And so part of our job is figuring out how to tell the story on a broader basis in even more compelling terms. That's the only thing I know for sure about the future is we've got to get our story out there and help people understand the life-changing, community-strengthening work that we do every day at Catholic Higher Ed.
Yeah.
I agree so much with Rob, everything he just said. And we have to tell our story very authentically and truthfully and not be afraid of it. And we have to be advocates for our institutions. I worry about what's going to happen next with this DEI business about Pell Grants and federal financial aid. But that doesn't mean I'm suddenly not going to think about my students and how they're going to thrive in this age. I will say at Trinity, we went through this tremendous, we call it the paradigm shift in our student population, going from predominantly white Catholic to predominantly students of color who are not Catholic. It's kind of a big shift. And yet, in the last 10 years, we have raised more money than we ever raised in the previous 100 years. What we found was that benefactors who understand the story and understand the good work we do will come out and support it in large numbers with large gifts. And we can't be afraid to tell our story because as much negative press as there is out there right now, there are a whole lot of other people who will come with us if we are able to be good advocates and authentic advocates for our work.
That's terrific.
And I think we can also highlight the resources that we have within the Catholic tradition and Catholic spirituality that help us hold the center. I mean, there's a lot of spiritualities that emphasize moderation and generosity and compassion, and so also really tapping into the values that help us avoid the extremes that then will also help to nurture and foster a culture of dialogue. And so it's not just a project for higher ed, but for journalism and media and all of the other areas of culture as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And with that, we are out of time. And I've been fascinated by this discussion. I wish we had another whole hour. I could go and could talk more. Thanks to our audience, and thanks very much to our panelists who have taken a lot of time out of very busy schedules to be with us. And uh, yes, just thank you. And we will, as I say to the audience, you'll be getting an email with the transcript. Um, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having
long.
us.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you.